At the turn of the 17th century, European missionaries and early modern travelers were buzzing with news of the Americas. This was the age of rapid advancement in European nautical technology, when the East and West became linked via new exchange networks, transporting people and goods in new circuits throughout the Atlantic world. The Jesuits, a branch of the Catholic Church, also known as the Company of Jesus, would play a critical role in the development of these newly formed pathways. How? Installing a network of international traveling Jesuits reporting back to European centers, crucial to the circulation of medical data between the Americas and Europe. 1582. Fernão Cardim leaves his post as minister of the Jesuit College of Évora. He and the Jesuit leading the mission, Cristóvão de Gouveia, depart for the port city of Lisbon to prepare for their travels to Brazil. Cardim and Gouveia would spend the next 5 months in Lisbon, fine-tuning their mission strategy to convert and reduce native populations by means of Catholic confessions, mass baptism rituals, and Christian marriage ceremonies. Cardim would then go on to spend the next 15 years documenting coastal Brazil and, as we will see, exploring and exploiting its lands and people. Upon arrival in any new location, but especially in Brazil, Jesuits took great care to document local languages and culture, penning letters and essays that doubled as survival manuals. In-depth surveys of gastronomic realities, social customs, as well as religious and healing practices. Cardim's survival manual focuses on practical descriptions of the natural world. That is, what to eat and how to eat it, or what not to eat because it was poisonous. We can be certain Cardim made no additions to his treatise after the year 1601, the year that the pirate Francis Cook stole Cardim's manuscripts during a raid on a Portuguese ship. 13 years later, 1614, English book pirate Samuel Purkis begins to publish Cardim's principal writings, but not crediting Cardim by name. Cardim would die in Brazil in 1625, having lost his extensive natural history of coastal Brazil while serving the Jesuit order as provincial father of Salvador da Bahia. For Europeans, Brazil represented a land of abundance, fertile with the food and medicines that they would need, not only to survive on the coast, but also to fuel their missionary work throughout the globe. It's here that Cardim's so-called New World begins to come into focus. Alex, our producer for the day, was born in Salvador da Bahia and was eager to give us a tour of the real Salvador.
Mais bonito.
Here we are in Pelourinho, one of the most important districts of the city of Salvador da Bahia. The Jesuit church behind me is one of many of the Jesuit churches that we have in the city. In fact, I'm looking at another one just in front of me now. The Jesuits were foundational to the Portuguese colonization of Brazil and were dedicated to their mission of evangelizing Tupi and Tapuia indigenous populations, which I'd say they had a decent amount of success doing given the very Catholic country that Brazil is today. It's a monumental place that marks the history that Salvador has experienced through the ages. Pelourinho itself, meaning whipping post, has a very sad connection with African slavery, Salvador being the hub of the transatlantic slave trade throughout the colonial period. I ask Alex to take us to his favorite lunch spot where, over a cold beer, we discuss the Salvador that he knows and loves. Então, Alex, o que é a cidade favorita de você do Brasil? É o Salvador?
Sim, Salvador.
É o Salvador e por quê?
Mais tranquilo, mais amigos, mais família, mais aconchegante.
E o que é o cor da Bahia? O coração.
O coração da Bahia, onde fica,
O que é?
que é o coração da Bahia para mim, o amor do povo, o amor das pessoas, é o verdadeiro coração da Bahia.
Isso é notável aqui. É. Soon, some of Alex's favorite dishes arrive. Fried fish with toasted manioc flour, a staple of the region, and spicy shrimp. Bahia is different than the rest of Brazil. Bahians substitute traditionally bland food with bold flavors, an inspirational contribution from Afro-Brazilian kitchens, blending Creole spices with Brazilian foodstuffs. Isso pica?
Pimenta,
Pimenta?
caliente,
Uh-huh.
muito bom.
The fish is served alongside tomatoes, limes, and a tomato pepper salad. Isso sim pica. Careful with the hot sauce. Just can't beat the taste of Bahia. After lunch, we travel to the Jesuit College of Salvador. This is where Cardim would first serve as dean and then later provincial father of Salvador, Bahia. Cardim would have walked these very corridors, working closely with medical staff and traveling missionaries, contributing to one of the most powerful global enterprises on the planet. The architecture we see here is repeated in Jesuit colleges the world over. Though the statues might vary in the central plaza, we see echoes of Jesuit construction across the Atlantic at the Jesuit College of Coimbra, back in the Old World. Coimbra was the central information hub for the Jesuits' international network. This was the site where information and knowledge gathered from Portuguese missions was organized, processed, and cataloged. It also served as Portugal's only academic institution for the instruction of medicine during the early modern period. When a missionary sent transatlantic communications, specifically about medicine, their letters would have passed through the Jesuit College here, where medical information was compiled in volumes that still exist today. It even has its own jail cells. This one would have been similar to Cardim's prison quarters in London, where he was ransomed by the English crown after the pirates' raid. On his journey to the New World, Cardim fell gravely ill. When he arrived in Bahia in 1583, it was another Jesuit, Padre José de Anchieta, who reportedly cured him with a medicina, that is to say a local medicine. Understood as a miraculous healing event within the Brotherhood, this was another reason that Cardim and his brothers paid careful attention to American botanical medicines. They might need them. This event likely was part of the reason that Cardim's writings focused on more than cataloging the natural world, but grew to encompass the collection of recipes for medicines or medicinas. His observations include working knowledge of local plants and specific instructions for ways to use them for medicinal effect. For example, Techicucu, according to Cardim, is the same plant that Nicolas Monardes identifies as Michoacán or Michoacán from the Caribbean. Even though Europeans had identified this plant already, it's one example of Cardim's ethnobotanical rigor.
Serve de purga. Toma-se esta raiz moída em vinho, ou água para febres. Toma-se em conserva de açúcar como marmelada. Coza-se com galinha, faz muita sede, mas é proveitosa e obra grandemente.
In addition to plants like the flower of Michoacán, he also discusses the details of other medicinas in the region. Of the 26 trees identified by Cardim, 10 are classified as medicinal, and the fruits of at least 10 others are also determined to have curative properties. Additionally, Cardim identifies, almost exclusively in Tupi, 14 different herbs with medicinal properties. The only plant that Cardim identifies in Portuguese is the erva santa, or tobacco. Calling tobacco saintly was an allusion to its use in Tupi and Tapuya healing rituals. We can see this, for example, in Cardim's excitement and anxiety about tobacco in his treatise.
Esta erva santa serve muito para várias enfermidades, como feridas, catarros, e principalmente serve para doentes da cabeça, estômago e asmáticos. E bebe muito fumo, e uma das delícias e mimos desta terra, e são todos os naturais e ainda os portugueses perdidos por ela.
Other so-called New World botanicals pose similar spiritual perils to the Jesuits, but none as mortal as poisonous snakes, the fear of which Cardim catalogues in depth.
Cobras que têm peçonha. Parece que este clima flui peçonha, assim pelas infinitas cobras que há, como pelos muitos alacrães, aranhas e outros animais imundos, e as lagartixas são tantas que cobrem as paredes das casas e agulheiras delas, e são espantosas, que como uma pessoa é mordido logo pede a confissão e faz conta que morre, e assim dispõe de suas coisas, sagrando-se, bebendo o unicórnio, o carimá ou qualquer outro remédio.
If the poisoned patient did not have access to a trained surgeon or ground up unicorn horn, Cardim recommends that they turn to indigenous remedies. For example, carimá. Since unicorns do not exist, carimá probably would have been the best option, given that it is a dry, fine flower ground from the cassava plant, which is known to have anti-venom properties, biomedically speaking. At the turn of the 17th century, the history of Cardim's manuscript takes us to the printing house outside of St. Paul's Churchyard, at the Sign of the Rose in London, where it was first pirated in translation for an Anglican, English-speaking public. Samuel Purkis included Cardim's work in Hakluyt's Posthumus or Purkis's Pilgrims. Cardim is not credited by name. In the 1614 edition, Purkis admits that he does not know the identity of the Portuguese author who penned the treatise. However, in the 1625 edition, Purkis expands this section. Here, we learn that the Anglican cleric, Sir Richard Hakluyt, acquired Cardin's manuscript from Cook for 20 shillings. Hakluyt's assistant and self-proclaimed successor, Purkis, inherited Cardin's treatise from Hakluyt.
It was written, it seemeth, by a Portugal friar, or Jesuit, which had lived 30 years in those parts, from whom, much against his will, the written book was taken by one Francis Cook of Dartmouth in a voyage outward bound for Brazil, 1601, who sold the same to Master Hakluyt for 20 shillings, by whose procurement it was translated out of Portugal into English. Great loss had the author of his work.
Purkis notes in the margin that Cardin's treatise also included some medicinal recipes. He writes,
I find at the end of the book some medicinal recipes, and the name prescribed, Dr. Manuel Tristan, Enfermerio de Colegio de Bahia, whom I imagine to have been author of this treatise. Cook reported that he had it of a friar, but the name Jesus differs times on the top of the page, and often mention the fathers and society. Makes me think him a brother of that order.
As we now know, Jesuit Manuel Tristan did not write the treatise that Purkis included in his travel narratives, though he did run the infirmary at the College of Bahia, where he would have been in close contact with Cardim. Purkis doesn't comment further on the recipes, but the meeting notes of the Botanical Society of Edinburgh give us a clue to what may have been included. May 11, 1871. The Botanical Society's meeting notes clearly credit Samuel Purkis with the discovery of a Brazilian herb known as ipecacuanha. Ipecacuai, in its original Tupi, its original translation means either roadside sick-making plant or low leaves vomit. In English, we know it as ipecac. Cardim describes the herb as a cure for excessive bleeding, câmaras de sangue. As he details how to prepare the medicament, Cardim instructs the reader.
Deita somente 4 ou 5 folhinhas. Cheira muito onde quer que está, mas o cheiro é farto e terrível. Esta raiz moída, botada num pouco de água, se pode serenar uma noite toda. E pela manhã se aguenta a água com a mesma raiz moída e cozada se bebe somente a água. E logo se faz purgar de maneira que cessam as câmaras de tudo.
When Cardim wrote these words, he had become one of the first Europeans to document the medical properties of ipecacuanha. What he didn't know was that the plant's root structure contains low levels of emetine, an alkaloid that acts as an amebicide, or amoeba killer. The administration of low doses of emetine for a short time inhibits protein synthesis in cells. This helps the body rid itself of harmful amoebas or infections of the gut. Whether commercially manufactured or extracted from the ipecacuanha, emetine has been used to treat dysentery and other amoebic infections for centuries. For present-day physicians, syrup of ipecac may be administered to induce vomiting after suspected or accidental poisoning. However, when emetine is administered in small doses, it can also act as a respiratory expectorant, to thin mucus and make coughing easier. It's also proven to be effective against hepatitis and can eliminate pockets of infection when deployed intravenously or directly into tissue. Timothy Walker's research indicates that ipecacuanha is one of the many medicines that the Portuguese extracted from the Brazilian natural world. More than others, Brazilian remedies became commercially and medically significant to global science and medicine. Not only does Walker's research show that natives commonly used these remedies, but he goes on to point out that many medicinal recipes were valuable commercially. The substances were standard, commonly stocked medicines in Brazilian apothecary shops in the 17th and 18th century. As Cardim's world comes into focus, the cityscape gives way to the countryside, and I begin to cross into the region of Alentejo, or the land beyond the Tagus River, the breadbasket of Portugal. I find myself wondering if the archives of Évora hold the secret to our early modern mystery. Today a tourist destination and a university city, Évora is a mix of Roman, Visigoth, and Arabic influences. A history that dates all the way back to the 1st century of the Common Era. Medieval walls built by Christian defenders of the city are set alongside early Roman aqueducts. And, once inside, it's almost as if time has stood still.
Por isso mesmo, deixa de estar.
We think that Cardim was born sometime between 1548 and 1549. He really didn't even know when he was born. He could only guess that it was around then. He would enter the order in 1556 and made his way to Évora to enter the university where he studied art and theology. These painted tiles recount stories from the Christian Bible, allegories that colored Cardim's view of the world, an imaginary that informed his writings on Brazil and his depictions of native people. These images decorate the classrooms of the Jesuit college in Évora, each room dedicated to its own discipline: natural history, theology, art, and so on. Eventually, he would become minister right here in Évora until he was called to Brazil that would have been 1582 when he headed to Lisbon in the month of October, actually. Just down the road, the Franciscans had their own project. I knew I had to dig deeper, and I thought to myself, what better way to get to know someone than to sit down to dinner with them? I decide to head to Evera's Toscafina to get a taste of Cardin's world. Evera, in addition to being Cardin's hometown, just so happens to be the epicenter of Portuguese gastronomy, influenced by layers of cultural history. Walking the medieval streets of Evera, you work up quite an appetite. And so I've popped into one of my favorite little restaurants in the city. We're always greeted with big smiles from the owners, who are also married. When asked about how that works, the wife says it's fairly difficult sometimes, but the food never is.
Oh,
Não, está bom. Yeah, passa, está
Never
bom.
waits for beer.
Nunca se espera pela cerveja. E logo, pão e queijo. Isso.
Mas isso traz para a mesa, é isso?
Está bom. Yeah, okay. The city stood at the crossroads of significant foodways that linked the ancient Roman world to the far-reaching corners of Lusitania. Through this occupation, the region witnessed the successful transplantation of wheat, olives, grapes, onions, and garlic, all of which would have been staples in Cardin's diet. Even though tomatoes and potatoes frequent today's Portuguese plates, they would have been out of place in traditional Portuguese diets, since these plants were native to the Americas and were not introduced to Portuguese palates until the 1600s. Each meal begins with regional bread, cheese, and olives. From there, we have salted cod stew, a national Portuguese dish that starts with a pot of boiling water, and then comes the cod. Salty fish broth is ladled over dried bread, seasoned with garlic and cilantro, and topped with a poached egg. Simple but delicious. Chicken sausage, though not the traditional pork variety, lends interesting insight into Portuguese culture in the 1500s. New Christians, or Jewish converts, might choose chicken sausage over pork, which allowed them to pass as Christian while still maintaining the religious traditions of Judaism. Though I still have a long way to go as I track Cardin's manuscripts through the Atlantic world, at least now I've sat at his table. Not only did I come to Evera to do this archival research to look for these recipes, I also came here to learn more about Cardim. We don't know a lot about his biography. Standing here next to this Roman temple, nearly 2,000 years old, really gives me some perspective on history that I just didn't have before. If we find these recipes, that'll be proof that the Jesuits took knowledge from the Tupi people and used it for their own benefit. Well, moment of truth. It's not there.
It's not?
It's not there.
What'd you find?
So I walk in. I mean, it's the public library, right? And so we're in Europe. So the public library, of course, has 16th century manuscripts all over it, right? And anybody can go in. You don't need to have special readership or anything. So I walk in, I leave my purse, I go in with my little pencil because you can't take pens, obviously, because you can't mark up a manuscript. So I've got my little pencil, I've got my little notebook. I think after having studied this guy and this text for 3 years, I was finally going to get to hold it. No, so I go to the librarian and I say, okay, I want to see this codex. I've got all of my biographical information all sorted out. So the codex, it's like a compendium of a bunch of manuscripts. So it's a bunch of different manuscripts from the 16th century. It's 459 pages. Cardim's text is like 70 of those. Anyway, so I walk in and I think I'm finally going to get like this visceral experience of like holding the same papers that Cardim touched and wrote on. And she's like, well, you know, we only do it digitally now because at some point they digitized the whole thing. So I had to pay 109 euro to get the whole codex, which is cool because now I have it. But I went through every single page and it's just not there. Just not there. Got essa zona específica porque estamos filmando algumas coisas lá, então. Coincidentally, the verb explorar in Portuguese, to explore, is the same as the word to exploit. So explorar, to explore, explorar, to exploit are one and the same. Dom Pedro Álvares Cabral, the first Portuguese explorer to hit the beaches of Brazil. 1501. He sent news of contact back to the crown, instituting the conquest and colonization of Brazil. On this map, we see Cabral's route to coastal Brazil, another relic of Portugal's imperial exploration and exploitation. There are different places around the city where you can really see the legacy of Portugal's maritime imperialism. Whether it's the monument itself, the Monument of Discovery, celebrating Portugal's expansion throughout the globe, or whether it's at the Museu da Cerveja, the Museum of Beer, which really might as well be called the Colonial Beer Museum because it has beers from around Portuguese colonies. To get a sense of how explorers would have felt on transatlantic trips, we charter a boat, stow our gear, and realize we have zero idea how to behave in front of real sailors. So, Cardim left in March of 1583, and here we are, July 2015. Nigel, a British expat and our captain for the day, agrees to sail toward the Tagus estuary, where the river becomes the sea. The thing is, there are only certain times of the year that he would be able to sail so that they could catch the trade winds off of Africa. Now we don't have that same problem because we have technology like motors. The Portuguese historically dedicated a lot of time and resources to developing their nautical technology. Shipbuilding, they did a lot of astronomy. Charting the stars allowed them to map the Earth, and they were really at the forefront of that in terms of the other European powers. The trip would have been 66 days in total. They took a small pit stop in the island of Madeira just to check in on the Jesuit order there, and then they were heading to Salvador Bahia. The names of the ships themselves are kind of indicative of the way that people felt about the journey. It's the Chagas de São Francisco, the Saint Francis, right? So he would have been the saint presiding over the journey.
And the saint's protection they'd need. Not everyone made it across the ocean. Maritime warfare killed many, as did accidents, infection, starvation, and thirst.
Once that wine runs out, I hope St. Francis has something up his sleeve.
Despite high fatality rates en route, Jesuits took to the seas in high numbers. What comes next? A large-scale character assassination of the Pajé and the Caraíba, indigenous medicine people. As soldiers in God's army, Jesuits charged themselves with the spiritual task to wage conquest against New World demons. In doing so, Europeans maligned indigenous people as unholy, demonic, beset by and in league with Satan. This, of course, is only one side of the story.
The missionaries were, of course, there doing their work because they were on this quest to convert all pagan souls. Interestingly enough, the term sorcery, which in Portuguese is feitiçaria, and the feiticeiro, which translates roughly as sorcerer, was used in the 15th century for the first time to apply to a population in mass. That is to say, all non-Christian spiritual, religious, or medical healers were called feiticeiros, or sorcerers. It was used to basically justify war against these people in the name of conquest, in the name of usurping their goods and resources without any juridical, political, or spiritual ramifications, essentially, because there was a legal code to conquest, believe it or not. And so by calling these people feiticeiros, there was justification in basically waging a spiritual conquest against them that was also physical in nature as well.
Missionaries sought out medical information in Brazil as part of an effort to transform American nature into Jesuit profit. As they did, depictions of the people of coastal Brazil were bent in all sorts of directions, with little opportunity for native peoples to weigh in. Jesuit writings and archival depictions like these provide an incomplete and biased account of indigenous medicine and healing rituals of the people of coastal Brazil. The Jesuits demonized the native feiticeiros as much as they did the landscape, seen here infested with demons and monsters. At the time, these images were considered non-fiction. Europeans superimposed old world myths on the people of Brazil, reminding us that not only did Europeans extract life forms, both physically and discursively, but spiritually as well. We have access to these Tupi and Tapuya archival images thanks to the John Carter Brown Library. And then there was the cannibalism. The Jesuits needed a legal justification for their conquest, chief of which was tied to Tupi and Tapuya cannibalism. An act integral to larger war rituals, victors would eat the flesh of enemy captives in order to assume the warrior's positive attributes. Post-encounter, however, natives often repurposed cannibalistic rituals to strike fear in European aggressors. Cannibalism was only one component of several central to native religious practices. The others, which we see depicted in the archive, are healing rituals and funerary rites. In this scene of healing, which plays out again and again in archival documents, plant material, tobacco smoke, and the maraca represent the primary tools in the ritual, which would have been accompanied by songs, music, and dance. This native first aid kit was crucial to spiritual and physical healing. Although the Jesuits condemned and criminalized the pagan source of this information, Amerindian rituals represented important sites for the excavation of indigenous botanical knowledge, which Jesuit missionaries mined in their pursuit for spiritual and physical power, even to their own consternation. Even though Cardim documents Tupi and Tapuya belief systems, he refuses to deem their beliefs religion, while admitting that there is a clear, systematized religious tradition at play.
Este gentio parece que não tem conhecimento do princípio do mundo. Do dilúvio parece que tem alguma notícia, mas como não tem escrituras, nem caracteres, a tal notícia escura e confusa. Este gentio não tem conhecimento algum do seu Criador, nem de coisa do céu, portanto não tem adoração nenhuma, nem cerimônias ou culto divino. Sabem que tem alma e que esta não morre. E depois da morte, vão a uns campos onde há muitas figueiras ao longo de um formoso rio. E todas juntas não fazem outra coisa senão bailar.
Cardim goes on to describe indigenous deities by name: Tupã, the thunder god, and Curupira, the forest spirit. Beyond Tupã and Curupira, Jesuits recognized the widespread belief in Sumé, the original pajé and central character in native oral history. Again, we see tension in Cardim's writing. Cardim's fondness and fascination for the people, their land, and their medicines, undercut by a creeping fear that his documentary subjects were agents of the devil. While native healers and spiritual leaders performed many types of social rituals, one of their most crucial roles was to serve as a conduit to channel occult knowledge of the natural world from sacred sources, which often focused on medical treatment. In the well-known scholarship of Jorge Couto, he makes it clear that natives administered ritual ceremonies performed specifically in the interest of social and physical wellness. This included, for example, exorcisms, the administration of blessings for food, guaranteeing the security of warriors, the interpretation of dreams, and directing ceremonies to uphold the natural rhythm of indigenous society. The pajé was entrusted as the bearer and perpetuator of local myths. Song and dance serve as the mediating forces that link the physical realm with the supernatural. Activities of this nature, which provided the ritual participants with certain forms of occult knowledge and power, were generally induced by trance. This heightened state was often aided by the ingestion of intoxicants or hallucinogenic drugs, and with a maraca in hand, the page would dance and sing in order to channel cosmic forces to gain otherworldly knowledge, bestow blessings, or call upon the sacred powers to facilitate a ritual task, whether it be health or socially related. I choose to see the Tupi and Tupuya without the Jesuits' demon-tinted glasses. As we see in this scene, women assumed the role of brewmasters, creating alcoholic beverages made from either chewed corn, cashews, manioc, or, where available, acai. Ritual was central to everyday life, which helped to maintain equilibrium between the cosmos and humans on Earth. Ritual burial, and grief after the death of a loved one. These were all important to the Tupi and Tupuya people. It's the scenes of rituals that we find in the archive that illuminate a different dimension of missionary encounters with Amerindian healers and spiritual leaders. The loud cries of wailing mourners would have rang in the ears of colonizers, as smallpox devastated Amerindian populations. It's this muted history that we stand to resurrect, at least in part, as we search the archives for Cardim's recipes. September 24, 1601. Cardim boards the San Vicente with Father João Madureira, along with 15 other Jesuits. Their voyage was cut short, however, and, in a dangerous turn of events, the San Vicente sailed off course into English waters. The ship crossed paths with English corsairs, or pirates who raid on the behalf of an empire. Dutch-born Francis Cook, pirating on behalf of the English crown at the time, intercepted the San Vicente and took possession of the ship after a full day's battle. What was left of the crew and passengers on board the San Vicente, including Cardim and Madureira, surrendered to Cook. Madureira would never make it back on dry land, dying at sea 10 days later. Cook brought Cardim to London, where he would be imprisoned for 2 years. The Gatehouse Prison is not the best-known imperial prison in London. Though it was demolished in 1776, the Gatehouse was built as part of Westminster Abbey and would have stood here, near the Abbey's Great West Door. During his imprisonment on this very spot, Cardim would continue to write letters to the Jesuit Brotherhood. And it's possible that his recipes are among the correspondence he wrote while imprisoned here. It's these letters, part of what we now know as the Hatfield Papers, that bring us to London, England. Unlike the Gatehouse Prison, the Tower of London still stands.
fortress, royal palace, and imperial prison, this structure remains one of London's most iconic symbols of imperial military might. Cardim was imprisoned based on the fraught relationship between Iberian and English crowns. The English, or Anglican crown, under the rule of Elizabeth I, was in a hot war with the Catholic Church. Throughout the early modern period, Anglican and Catholic forces competed for supremacy, both spiritually and economically. European empires at this time were in a race to carve up the Americas, with many parts of South America still up for grabs. Competing crowns, spiritual rivalries. It's against this backdrop that Cardim would be incarcerated for 2 years. Cardim was able to negotiate his freedom in 1603, returning to Salvador Bahia without his manuscripts in 1604. (1614), bits of Cardim's treatise would start to hit the shelves of London booksellers, without any credit to his name. In Cardim's world, beginning in the 1500s, the area around St. Paul's Church and Fleet Street was fast becoming a printing and publishing destination. The Demon Barber came later. It's important to acknowledge the volume of Cardim's writing at this time, when publishing was a flourishing business. Cardim's papers had been pirated once in the physical sense by Cook, and were primed to be pirated again, in the literary sense, by Purkis. St. Paul's Churchyard, The Sign of the Rose, 1614. It's on these grounds that Purkis sells the first edition of Cardim's pirated treatise. And it is a hit. The international travel stories, or pilgrimages as Purkis names them in his encyclopedias, were an integral part of a new print market. So much so that Purkis continues to publish new editions of Purkis Pilgrims until his death. In each edition, Purkis includes more and more of Cardim's treatise, until the 1625 edition, when he expands the section to include more clues to the identity of the writer. The final edition, 1626, the first time Cardim's treatise is published in full, albeit in translation. It is unclear what happened to Cardim's manuscript after Purkis's death, but the original, handwritten copies of Cardim's treatise arrive in Evora sometime over the next few centuries. In 1925, a librarian notices startling similarities between an old, handwritten manuscript and Purkis's famous travel narrative. The librarian, Capistrano de Abreu, begins to connect the dots between Cardim's original manuscripts and Purkis's translations. Jesuit priest, ransacked by pirates in 1601. Medicinal plants, extensive ethnographies. 1925, exactly 300 years after Cardim's death,
Abreu was able to match Cardin's handwriting to Purkis's famous publication, and to give Cardim credit for his treatise on the land and people of Brazil. The British Library, one of 3 European archives that may house Cardin's lost medicinal recipes. We've come to investigate Cardin's letters, part of a larger collection known as the Hatfield Papers. Scattered across a mass of documents, we find the letters that detail Cardin's detainment and imprisonment. Unfortunately, layers of library bureaucracy make it difficult to access Cardin's original Portuguese. Using the British Library's renderings, we find Cardim in prison, desperate for the return of his writings.
I, as I have mentioned in former letters, have lost a great deal. It is usual with the English, when they receive anything important from merchants or other travelers, to treat them well and let them go. I beseech you to grant me an interview. As religious men, we have never done any harm to any of your people. So now we pray that our property, especially our writings, may be given back to us, and ourselves allowed to go free.
It's unclear how, but during Cardim's imprisonment, he managed to negotiate the release of an English knight, who was held in Belgium at the time. In a letter dated 17 January 1603, we find evidence of a quid pro quo, Cardim's liberty in exchange for the Englishman's.
I would humbly beg you to consider our case. You are aware that both our captivity and our liberation, by your favor, will be known to all nations. We are persuaded, therefore, that by an honorable exchange, you will satisfy all England, and all the nations and great men who know that these matters have been concluded. And by doing so, you will have myself and all my fellows always ready to assist English prisoners.
Even though he negotiated his freedom from prison, it was at a great loss to Cardim. The Hatfield Papers tell us that musical instruments, wooden candlesticks, silks, and of course, his writings were stolen. What's more, at least 2 of Cardim's brothers died after being taken into English custody. What we learn from the Hatfield Papers is this: Cardim was taken captive by the English, spent 2 full years in prison, and negotiated his own release. He would never again see his writings. As we arrive in Madrid, our story begins to feel like it's merging with Cardim's. Someone steals a few things from my checked baggage on the flight from Portugal to Spain. The crew gets hit too. It wasn't exactly a pirate's raid, but somewhere between check-in and arrival, valuable equipment and personal mementos disappear. Before leaving Évora, we made multiple copies of our documentary materials, so the footage survives intact. A lesson we learned from Cardim's lost work: the importance of backup copies. We arrive in Madrid just in time for the Great Exodus, when the city gets so hot that Spaniards leave in droves to travel somewhere else, somewhere cool. The temperature? Hovering at about 100 Fahrenheit. These are Castilla's dog days. let me back up. Okay, so here we go. We've got Portugal the pair, and we've got Castile and Aragon here, two Spanish kingdoms, right? So there was a crisis in Portugal in terms of who was going to inherit the seat of the crown next. And so at that point, the Spanish crown, Castile and Aragon, stepped in and they said, hey, okay, this is getting out of control. We're going to just assume the seat of government. Everybody's staying independent. So Portugal the pair is still over here, and then we've got Castile and Aragon over here. But all of Portugal, including all of the colonial possessions throughout West Africa, the Americas, and beyond, are all technically under Habsburg rule. So at this point, you have Portugal under Spanish rule, and that's why it's not out of the question that these recipes are with some of the papers of Cardim, letters actually, that are housed in Madrid. I've got an excellent edition of Cardim's Tratados, put together by Ana Maria de Acevedo, because this was commissioned to commemorate the Descobrimentos Portugueses, right? The Portuguese discoveries. They're still using some backwards terminology. Nonetheless, it's an excellent edition. In the appendix, actually, there is a letter that was documented originally by Serafim Leite, who is a very well-known scholar on Brazil. So anyway, we've got this letter that Cardim wrote to Padre Antonio Calasso, and we know that it's housed in Madrid at the Royal Academy of History.
The archive at the Real Academia de la Historia. Maybe, somehow, the lost recipes are among Cardim's papers here in Madrid.
I was really nervous because when I looked up the regulations to get into the Real Academia de la Historia, it said that I needed a letter from the embassy, and I was like, well, I surely don't have that. So I contacted one of the librarians there, who was very, very nice, actually sent me a digital copy of the letter that I wanted to look at, but I know that if these medicinal recipes are in the archive, they're not going to necessarily be archived. So I'm going to go, and there's a manuscript called Los Jesuitas, right, the Jesuits. And so I'm thinking, well, if I flip through the manuscript, maybe the medicinal recipes will be there. Luckily, it's really just down the street, so we don't have to travel far. So what I really think is much more likely, given the value of this type of information in the 16th century, remember this is the beginning of bioprospecting of the Americas pretty much, right? I think that's much more likely that somebody pocketed these recipes thinking, well, down the line I might be able to sell these, whether they're as medicine or to somebody else who knew what to do with them to make money. Ah, yeah, it's just here, Calle de León. Okay, let's go. I didn't find what I came here looking for, but I'm certainly walking away with something very different. I do feel like I know Cardim better after all of this. Walking the same streets that he walked in Evora, breathing the same air, eating the same bread that's been made for centuries in Alentejo or the land beyond the Tagus. I know he was anxious to get back to Brazil, and I know that he loved it there. He was in awe of the flora and fauna, and really thought that the indigenous customs were pretty cool, which is why he spent so much time documenting them. But I still have questions.
Primarily, it's a question of legacy. Cardim didn't discover anything, but his manuscript is a significant mapping of Tupi and Tapuya medical knowledge. While bioprospecting in Brazil opened new medical pathways in Western medicine, it's important to remember that it did so standing on the shoulders of Amerindian healers and spiritual leaders. From the Jesuit perspective, however, Cardim was a good Christian. After his death, Jesuit missionary Antonio Vieira writes this eulogy in a letter from Brazil back to Portugal. Passou a melhor vida Fernão Cardim. Varão verdadeiramente religioso e de vida inculpável, muito afável e benigno, em especial para seus súditos. Estendia-se esta sua caridade aos de fora, e mais particularmente os presos da cadeia e os pobres do hospital, porque estes visitava a miúdo, remediando suas necessidades com esmolas. But the recipes, what kind of information would have been included in them? And what could it have taught us about the Tupi and the Tapuya people? We can only speculate where the recipes might have ended up. What we can do, however, is trace the circulation of the plants, like that of Ipecacuanha, for example. We know it appeared in England first, then in France, but the recipes, like so many other relics of the Tupi and the Tapuya culture, are yet to be recovered from history's murky past. When Cardim put pen to paper, he recorded significant botanical information, gastronomic realities, social and spiritual mechanics, as well as linguistic variation among coastal Tupi populations. He identified by name roughly 100 different nations and localized several smaller communities situated in the northern zones of the Amazon. Even though he wasn't recognized as such in his own lifetime, Cardim's work is one of the most significant archival sources for 16th century indigenous studies on Brazil. Cardim always lived between spaces, between magic and medicine, exploration and exploitation, and old and new worlds. And it's between these worlds where we may have to leave Cardim and his recipes. As I think back to my time making this documentary, it hasn't always been easy.
Yesterday, a nice gentleman was kind enough to recommend O'Gillen's Irish Pub to us, but I gotta tell you something. We are feeling it this morning.
The challenges of documenting new and foreign places, and the unexpected surprises. old fears.
This is now the second time that I have been pooped on by a bird in Everett.
And new friends. This chapter is over, for now at least.